There were 4 of them, identical in every way, but on the night of October 3rd, 1876, only one was seen entering the locked vault, and yet all 4 vanished. They called them the Granger brothers, but that was never their real name. No birth records, no baptism certificates, no known parents, just a grainy photograph tucked in the drawer of a coroner's desk. 4 men with the same face, same eyes, same stare. In 1876, the town of Black Hollow, Missouri had no sheriff, no newspaper, and no visitors. That made it the perfect place for something unnatural to unfold. This is the story the medical journals refused to publish, the testimony that mysteriously disappeared from federal archives, a case so disturbing that every doctor, judge, and clergyman who encountered it either vanished, went mad, or took a vow of silence before the decade was over. We begin with the vault. It belonged to the Coldstone Mercantile Trust, a small-town bank known only to a few elite trading families. On the night of October the 3rd, the vault door, crafted from 9 inches of reinforced steel, was discovered wide open. Inside, nothing missing, nothing stolen, just one thing left behind. A folded scrap of parchment bearing the Granger family sigil, a serpent swallowing its own tail, and written beneath it, in perfect Latin, non quatuor sumus. We are not 4. Witnesses swore they had seen all 4 brothers in completely different places that night, at the local tavern, on the church steps, in the mayor's garden, and one standing silently in the middle of the road, staring into the woods. How can 4 men exist in 5 places? How can their footprints all match, same shoe size, same stride, same wear patterns? And most chilling of all, how did the lanterns dim every time one of them entered the room? This isn't a ghost story. This is a psychological blueprint, a code hidden in flat. Sure, you're not just hearing history, you're being initiated into something else. Now keep watching, because once we reach section 11, I'll ask you to comment a phrase that will bind you to this journey, not just for the algorithm, but for the transformation. There are places that disappear from history not because they were forgotten, but because someone made sure they were. Black Hollow was one of them. You won't find it on modern maps. Search census records from 1870 to 1880. It's not there. And yet, in the archives of a decommissioned postal station in Lexington, Missouri, sits a single page torn from an old ledger. It lists one delivery route, dated 1876, addressed to the Granger Estate, Hollow Vale. 4 parcels, delivery confirmed by hand. Hand delivery was reserved only for sites too dangerous for regular carriers. It meant someone had to travel alone, often by horse, without backup, and without expectation of return. The region was swampy. Trees hung low. Mist rose from the earth like breath from a dying thing. Travelers reported strange phenomena as they approached the hollow, compasses spinning, horses refusing to cross the creek, watches stopping all at once, but those who pressed on spoke of one building at the center of it all, a manor of perfect symmetry. Not grand, not Gothic, just flawless. Every shutter aligned, every brick mirrored, a house built without error, which in itself is unnatural. And then there were the Grangers. No one ever saw them arrive. No wagons, no workers, no shipments of stone or wood. The estate was simply there, complete, fully furnished. The 4 brothers appeared shortly after, stepping into town one morning as if they'd always lived there. They introduced themselves without hesitation, identical smiles, identical handshakes. Jonathan, Elias, Matthias, and Alaric, all age 31, all dressed the same, and yet when spoken to individually, each had different preferences. One quoted Roman philosophers, one preferred silence, one watched birds, one kept asking about local land purchases. The townsfolk didn't know what to make of them, but one thing became clear within a week. The brothers knew things. They knew what you owed the bank. They knew who your daughter was secretly meeting. They knew your real name, even if you'd changed it, and they used that knowledge sparingly, at first. Then came the disappearances. 3, in the first 2 months. Always someone who had refused the Grangers something, a deed, a loan, A confession. No bodies, just a smear of ash, and the faint sound of 4 synchronized knocks on the window, even when you lived alone. The hollow was never meant to be found, but you found it, and now it sees you too. By the 3rd month, Black Hollow began to change. It wasn't just the weather, though the sky stayed unnaturally gray and the air carried a metallic scent like old blood. It was the people. Their habits shifted. They walked differently. They avoided their own reflections. It all started with the mirrors. You see, the Granger brothers had a ritual. Every Sunday night, as the town slept, all 4 would emerge from their estate at precisely 11:11 p.m., not a minute early, not a second late. Dressed in black, eyes forward, they would walk single file to the abandoned Masonic Hall at the edge of town. The building had been sealed for over a decade. Its previous members died in a fire that left no scorch marks, just silence. Yet somehow the Grangers had keys. Witnesses, those brave or cursed enough to follow, described what they saw through cracked windows. Inside that hall, there were no altars, no candles, no symbols, just 4 mirrors, 8 feet tall, arranged in a perfect square. Each brother stood before one and stared for hours. No words, no movement, no sound, just breathing. Inhale, exhale, in perfect synchronization. Some said the mirrors weren't reflections, they were windows, portals, that each brother was staring not at himself, but at something waiting on the other side. A woman named Clara Gibbons, a laundress known for her curious nature, dared to watch from the shadows every week. She said one night Elias's reflection blinked, but he didn't, and then the reflection turned away from the mirror, while Elias kept staring straight ahead. 3 days later, Clara vanished. The only thing found in her home was a basin of red water and a cracked mirror, with 4 handprints on the glass, all identical. This was no performance, no madness. This was a system. The Grangers were practicing something, honing a discipline older than religion and colder than science, something that required complete psychological control and perfect symmetry of will. The townspeople began covering their mirrors, then smashing them. Some refused to look at themselves at all. And yet, even in their panic, no one confronted the brothers, not even the preacher, not even the constable. Because everyone knew the truth, even if they couldn't say it aloud. They weren't watching their reflections. They were feeding them. On November 6, 1876, Black Hollow's oldest resident, a retired surveyor named Ephraim Locke, was found dead in his study. No signs of struggle, no marks on his body, just his hand resting on an open leather-bound ledger that no one remembered him owning. It was bound in human skin. Inside were pages of meticulously handwritten notes, written in 4 distinct styles, yet all seemingly penned by the same hand. The ink was iron-rich, the scent unmistakable. Not ink at all, but dried blood. At the top of the first page, in ornate calligraphy, was the phrase, "The Equivalence Project, Phase 2, Subject Town Number 3, Black Hollow." It listed names, dozens of them, everyone in town. Beside each name were 5 columns: guilt, obedience, secrets, leverage, expiration. Each scored numerically. Every man, woman, and child had been evaluated. Next to Ephraim's name was one word: complete. He had been their final assessment. The town council panicked. Only 7 members remained. 3 had vanished the week prior. They burned the ledger in the square, but the smoke rose black and oily, leaving a stench that lingered in the clothes and hair of everyone who watched. But before the flames took it, one page was torn free by a gust of wind and caught by the schoolteacher Mary Whitlock. She hid it in the floorboards of her classroom and fled town 3 days later. That page survives, barely legible, and contains the following: mirror compliance, 88%, thought suggestion, penetration, 73%, memory rewrite, threshold, 61%, social erosion, curve, satisfactory, quadril form, transmission, in progress. What is quadril form? What were they transmitting? Why was memory being rewritten? The language wasn't scientific, it was strategic, like war planning, or psychological colonization. And then came the dreams. Everyone in Black Hollow reported identical nightmares. A room with no doors, a mirror with no reflection, a voice whispering the same phrase, "You are not you." It was clear now. The Grangers weren't businessmen, they were architects of something deeper, testing obedience, measuring resistance, identifying weaknesses. They weren't just here to study the town, they were here to replicate it. And if you think this is just a story, why did a page from that same ledger show up in a Missouri police evidence locker in 1974? We are not alone in this system. On the morning of November 19, 1876, every child in Black Hollow Elementary arrived exactly on time. That in itself was strange. Most were habitually late, and November rain had flooded the roads. Yet somehow, all 23 children entered the classroom at precisely 8 o'clock a.m., soaked but silent. Mary Whitlock, the school teacher, would later describe the atmosphere as oppressively synchronized. The children didn't laugh, didn't squirm, didn't speak to one another. They simply sat at their desks, hands folded, eyes forward, waiting. At 8:04 a.m., Mary began taking attendance, but before she could say a word, the entire class rose to their feet and spoke in perfect unison. 4 faces, 1 voice, 1 mind, 1 will. Then they sat. Silence returned. Mary, shaken, pale, excused herself, locking the door behind her and sprinting to the sheriff's office. But when she returned minutes later with Deputy Raymond Fry, the children were gone. Every desk empty, every coat and satchel still hanging on the wall. 23 students, missing. No footprints in the hall, no broken windows, no open doors. Just one thing left behind, written on the blackboard in perfect penmanship: assimilation ahead of schedule. The town erupted into hysteria. Families wept in the streets, fathers loaded rifles, mothers boarded up windows, but none dared go to the Granger estate. That night, a candlelight search party scoured the woods. They found only one child, 8-year-old Benjamin Keller, sitting on a tree stump by the edge of the creek, staring at his own reflection in the water. When approached, he whispered, "He told us what's coming. He told us the world is a mirror, and the ones who survive are the ones who learn how not to reflect." Benjamin never spoke again. He died 6 days later, eyes open, mouth stitched shut with thread made of hair, human hair, braided in 4s. There were no funerals, no graves, just questions, and growing fear. Because the message had changed. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about replacement. The Granger brothers weren't shaping the town's behavior. They were preparing it for a new operating system. And this incident with the children was the first public demonstration. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? The truth isn't behind you. It's underneath you. The townspeople of Black Hollow always spoke about the Granger estate as if it were alive, not haunted, aware. And the centerpiece of that mansion, seated in the grand foyer between 2 black walnut staircases, was a 7-foot-tall mirror unlike anything anyone had seen. No frame, no tarnish, just a flawless sheet of obsidian glass. But it didn't reflect, not even light. Sheriff Ewell tried to explain it once. He said, "It swallows your shape but not your shadow. And when you move, your silhouette moves before you." Every visitor who stood before it reported the same feeling: vertigo, nausea, and a strange sensation behind the eyes, like something looking out from in. The Granger brothers never acknowledged it. They claimed it was a decorative import from the East, yet no trade manifest or customs log listed it. No one could trace its origin, and when a local blacksmith named Jonas Clay tried to tap it with a tuning fork, the tone never came back, as if the mirror absorbed sound itself. One night after the incident with the school children, Mary Whitlock returned to the estate alone. She entered the foyer, stood before the mirror, lit a lantern, and for the briefest moment she saw them. All 23 children, standing silently inside the glass, as if behind a veil. Their eyes black, their mouths stitched, but not with thread, with thought. She blinked, and they were gone. But in their place was writing on the mirror, as if etched from the inside. They passed the compliance trial. Next phase, duplication. Mary screamed, but the mansion had already closed behind her. No wind, no creaking floorboards. The house had sealed itself. She was missing for 5 days. When she returned, barefoot and bloodied, she had a message carved into her back, not slashed, but burned in with surgical precision. You are the last one who remembers. Mary was institutionalized, diagnosed with mirror-induced hysteria, but her drawings, recovered decades later, matched diagrams found in CIA psychotronic warfare experiments from 1964. What was this mirror? A portal, a technology, a living archive? And why, according to a declassified DARPA file, was it photographed again, untouched, in an abandoned Nevada test facility in 1981? Whatever the Grangers brought to Black Hollow wasn't just an object, it was a receiver, and something was responding. Dr. Elias Greaves was a man of science, rational, methodical, unshaken by local folklore. As the town's only physician, he'd treated everything from cholera to childbirth. But in the winter of 1876, something began to break in him. It started with the voices. Not the kind one imagines from stress or sleepless nights, but voices that spoke through his patients. Children, adults, the elderly, all repeating the same sentence in the middle of unrelated conversations. "You're dreaming, doctor. Wake up." Greaves ignored it. At first, but then came the drawings. Every patient, regardless of age, started sketching the same symbol during examinations. A circle split by 4 lines, perfect symmetry, inked with unsettling precision. One day, a 6-year-old girl named Alice stepped into his office with her mother. Nothing wrong, just a mild cough. But when Greaves placed his stethoscope on her chest, her voice shifted, deeper, older, masculine. "You were there, Elias. The experiment. The failed one." She grabbed his wrist and pressed her small fingers hard into his veins. "They're watching through you now." Greaves recoiled, sent them home, then locked himself in his study for 4 days. No food, no sleep, just diagrams, notes, and frantic letters to a colleague in Massachusetts, a Dr. Charles Haven, a pioneer in early neurosurgical hypnosis. The final letter Greaves sent read, "I've isolated the echo. It resides between the hemispheres, not physical, not electrical, but informational. I believe it's not a delusion, but an implanted directive, something placed there, not by trauma, but by architecture." Then silence. He was discovered days later in his office, seated upright, skull partially removed, trepanation tools bloodied on the desk, and beside him, a mirror shard embedded with human hair, twisted in 4 braids. Written on the walls in chalk, "The mind is not the origin, it is the interface." The local priest called it demonic possession, the state called it psychosis, but a traveler passing through, a man with no name, just a badge reading Observer 6, told the sheriff something different. He cut too deep, not into his brain, into the instruction layer. They've known since Mesopotamia that once you access the interface, it begins writing back. What had Dr. Greaves found? A memory that wasn't his? A command hidden in all of us? Or had he, in his desperate logic, uncovered the horrifying possibility? That thought itself may not be ours. March 14th, 1876. Black Hollow awoke to stillness. Not silence, not calm, but a stillness so unnatural that even the birds refused to sing. At precisely 3:17 a.m., every mechanical clock, pocket watch, and wind-up device in town froze. The post office, the church bell, the mayor's wall pendulum, all halted at the same moment. Not slowed, not broken, just paused. And it wasn't just time. Fires wouldn't burn. Wells stopped drawing water. Even the horses refused to move. Some collapsed entirely, their eyes wide with terror, but their hearts still beating, as if suspended in a trance. Only one person remained active, Ruth Granger. She walked barefoot through town, wearing a white linen dress soaked from the hem to the waist, despite no rain for weeks. Her eyes were rolled skyward, lips murmuring a language no one recognized. The only words she said clearly and loudly were uttered in the center of the town square. "We've breached the casing. The signal is no longer bound to bone." She fell to the ground, convulsed, then went completely still. By 3:18 a.m., time resumed. Every watch ticked, every pendulum swung. But the damage was done. Over 40 townspeople reported missing time, memory gaps, or waking visions of their own homes rearranged, as if someone had rehearsed their lives and put everything back just slightly wrong. A newborn infant was found cradling a journal that hadn't existed prior, a leather-bound book with no ink, only pages that glowed faintly under moonlight. It pulsed once every 5 seconds like a heartbeat. Sheriff Ewell tried to burn it. It didn't char. It screamed. The Granger brothers were nowhere to be found. Only Ruth remained, catatonic in the infirmary, her hands twitching in symmetrical patterns that mirrored mathematical notations from the Fibonacci sequence, the same sequence later discovered carved in the sandstone walls of Göbekli Tepe, a site that wouldn't be unearthed until 1994. Whatever happened at 317 wasn't a glitch, it was an unlocking, and from that moment forward, the town's descent wasn't gradual, it was orchestrated, like music, with movements, crescendos, and an unseen conductor who had just lifted his baton. Time had been interrupted, but by what? By whom? And for how long had we been synced to a clock that was never ours to begin with? Beneath St. Elias Chapel, the oldest structure in Black Hollow, there was a trapdoor long forgotten, covered in dust, hidden behind the organ, and sealed with 4 iron locks shaped like human vertebrae. No key, no hinges, only pressure-sensitive plates that responded to human breath. It opened for the first time in decades on March 20th, 1876. A boy named Samuel Boone, mute since birth, had wandered into the chapel during a storm. Witnesses claimed the boy stood silently in front of the trapdoor, placed both hands on the wood, and exhaled. The iron locks cracked, not clicked. Cracked. As if resisting something they'd been designed to contain, not protect. The stairwell led down into a hollow chamber lined with walls of salt. There, hundreds of rolled scrolls, made not of paper but dried skin, were stacked like records. Written on them, entries dated across centuries, events, names, phrases, all in English, all referencing things that hadn't happened yet. One entry read, April 3rd, 1876. The twins consume the fourth echo. Do not interrupt the reflection, or the loop begins anew. Another, June 12th, 1904. The Red River speaks. 13 float. 1 survives. Silence him before he dreams. Some of these scrolls referenced individuals currently living in Black Hollow. One scroll was labeled Sheriff Ewell. Inside it read, does not know what he guards. His badge is not iron. It is a tether. When it rusts, the veil thins. Another, Elias Greaves, the same doctor who had trepanned his own skull, found the key but never saw the lock. His brain was a map, but he mistook it for a curse. Then, the most disturbing, Samuel Boone. The scroll he touched instantly began to rot. The text, once clear, turned to liquid, but not before revealing one final phrase. He is the vessel. The breath returns through him. Do not let him speak. Samuel, after the at day, began to hum. Not songs, not melodies, coordinates, frequencies, patterns that caused metal to bend and mirrors to fog from the inside out. The town's pastor attempted to destroy the scrolls. He burned for 7 minutes before collapsing, without a mark on his body, only his voice gone and his hands forever locked in the shape of a tuning fork. Something below the church had been listening. Now it was learning. 3 days after the scroll chamber was uncovered, Deputy Clarence Harrow disappeared. Not missing, vanished. His boots were found neatly placed on the floor of the town jail. His revolver untouched. His badge rusted over, though it had been polished that very morning. In his place, a map appeared, pinned to the jail wall, drawn in charcoal and something that shimmered faintly under lantern light. No one had seen who put it there. No one claimed to have touched it. But the map wasn't of Black Hollow. Not exactly. It was of a place beneath Black Hollow, a mirrored twin of the town's layout, streets, houses, chapel, but distorted, warped, like reflections seen through oil. Roads curved where they should be straight. Homes were placed upside down. The courthouse had no roof, only a spiraling tunnel descending into darkness. At the center was the Granger house, only not labeled as such. Instead it read, Origin Mouth. Sheriff Ewell called in cartographers from the state capital. They tried to chart its geography, but the measurements refused to hold. Distances expanded when you turned your head. Some buildings, when marked, appeared on the real town's surface the next day but slightly different. A window added where none existed before. A door that led only to black stone. One man tried to copy the map. He was found the next morning with black ink pooled inside his eyes and a single word carved into his neck. Plagiarist. The original map was eventually stored in the church under lock and key, but it kept redrawing itself. New sections appeared, new annotations, written in a hand that matched no one in town. Phrases like, "The mother returns through wood." "He who hums is the mouth's echo." "Do not look at House 41 at twilight." Soon, House 41 vanished. Not abandoned, physically gone. Only a rectangle of scorched earth remained where it stood. Townsfolk reported hearing knocking in the middle of the night coming from the empty space. Always 3 knocks, always at 2:09 a.m. The map grew darker with each passing night. More structures, more symbols. Then it added something living. The sheriff himself, labeled in red, the unknowing conductor. He began to dream of footsteps echoing under his skin, of stairs descending inside his lungs. This wasn't a map anymore. It was an instruction manual, and someone or something was beginning to build. It began with the Granger quadruplets. One by one they stopped responding to their names, not in defiance, in confusion. When called Thomas, the second boy would turn his head. When called Eli, the third would flinch. When asked their age, all 4 gave different answers, none of them correct. Birth certificates confirmed they were identical, born seconds apart. But something was splitting them now. Their teacher at the Black Hollow schoolhouse, Miss Adler, noticed the shift first. The boys began humming during lessons, not together, separately. Low, dissonant tones, out of sync yet forming strange harmonies. When scolded, they stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused as if waiting for something to finish downloading. Other children grew unsettled. One girl, 6-year-old Lydia Mance, began scratching her arms raw during class. When asked why, she whispered, "They're crawling under the desks. I saw one come out of Henry's mouth." No one named Henry existed at the school. Then the drawings started. Crayons, charcoal, even blood. Dozens of children across town began sketching the same image, though none of them admitted seeing it before. A tall, eyeless figure wearing a preacher's robe made of stitched-together maps. One hand held a lantern made of bone, the other, a tuning fork humming with dark smoke. Behind him a church stood upside down, its bell melting into the sky like tar. The children called him the Listener. One boy carved this figure into the floorboards of his own home. When his father tried to whip him for defacing the floor, the man slipped, cracked his head, and was found smiling, eyes wide open, lips stitched together with his own hair. By the 3rd week, the entire 4th grade class stopped speaking, not one word. Instead, they would gather silently in the school's back courtyard, form a circle, and begin to mouth something. In unison, no sound, just breath, rhythmic, purposeful. Miss Adler described it as watching a silent ritual. She tried to record them. Her camera exploded, not broke, exploded, showering the ground with glass and ink. And then the dreams began. Parents across Black Hollow reported hearing children chanting in their sleep, words in no known language, but when translated phonetically, the pattern matched something found deep in the archives below the church. He listens because we forgot to. We sing because silence hurts him. The town called it a phase. But the Granger twins were growing. Not taller. Wider. They found the first tunnel under the Carter farm. It wasn't part of the old root cellar. It was beneath it, hidden beneath a false floor of aged wood and crumbling salt blocks. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for a child to crawl through, and the walls were clawed. Not carved, not shoveled, clawed. Deep grooves in the dirt, inhuman in length and uneven in spacing. Deputy Orson, who had taken over after Harrow's disappearance, led a crew down with ropes and lanterns. They returned an hour later, wide-eyed and shaking, claiming the tunnel split into 7 directions, all descending, all vibrating faintly with something that wasn't sound, but memory. Soon more tunnels were found, under the church, beneath the schoolhouse, underneath the Granger property, though the family insisted they had never seen them. No one had built these, they had always been there. Reverend Tillman declared it a sign of judgment. He organized a midnight sermon at the chapel. Hundreds showed, all desperate, all afraid. They brought candles, crucifixes, and children. The doors were locked from the inside. The screaming started minutes later. Witnesses say the windows turned black, not dark, black, as though painted in ink. No one could see in, no one could hear out. The front door began to bulge outward, breathing like a lung. Then it slammed open with such force it shattered the hinges. Not one person remained inside, except a single infant placed perfectly on the pulpit, cradled in a nest of old bones and feathers. The church organ began to play, alone. Its keys moved in patterns that no human hand could replicate. The song was not melodic. It was instructional, like a lullaby composed by something that had only heard human music once, long ago, and hated it. Beneath the floorboards, rumbling began. Not like an earthquake, more like digging. And then they heard the voices. Hundreds, whispering in perfect unison, speaking backwards, repeating a phrase that bled into the minds of every listener, as if seeded directly into thought. We were here when your bones were soft. We remember your shape before you were given names. After that night, the ground itself became unreliable. Paths warped. Footsteps echoed out of sequence. Time faltered. Something beneath Black Hollow had woken up, and it was building its way upward. It began at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sun blinked. Not behind clouds, not in eclipse. It blinked like a dying eye, and the sky turned a sickly hue that no one could name. Not gray, not green, something between. The light itself felt thicker, like syrup poured over the town, muting sound and slowing breath. Birds froze mid-flight and dropped from the air. Children screamed, but no sound came out. One boy, Matthew Barnes, ran to his mother with wide eyes and trembling hands. He wasn't speaking. He was signing in a language no one had taught him. Symbols traced in the air, fluid and ancient. His hands moved too fast, blurring into smoke until they caught fire. A cold blue flame that didn't burn but peeled. His skin remained unbroken, but the truth beneath flickered for a moment, and what they saw? Not human. Just a moment. Then it vanished. By sundown, clocks stopped ticking. Not froze, refused to move. Some ticked backward, others began chiming without bells. Midnight struck 13 times, even though it was only 6:12 p.m. People tried to flee. None succeeded. Roads looped. Cars ran out of gas 5 minutes after being filled. Horses refused to leave the town line. One family, the Eldridges, walked for 6 hours in what they thought was a straight line. They returned to Black Hollow from the opposite direction. When asked, their shoes were filled with sand, and their mouths with ash. Those who stayed indoors weren't safe either. Walls began weeping, literally. Water? No, something thicker, viscous, warm. Some swore it was milk, others blood. One man collected it in a jar and sent it to a chemist in New York. The chemist wrote back, "This compound contains both mammalian DNA and limestone. It should not exist. I'm sending this letter," then burning everything. Then the birds came back. But they weren't the same. Feathers like soot, beaks sewn, eeled shut, wings that moved without air. They perched in silence, on windows, rooftops, even power lines, watching. And when someone looked too long, the birds smiled. not beaks, teeth. Black Hollow was no longer part of the world. It had become a vessel, and something inside it was preparing to pour out. By the second week of August, the town cemetery began to change. Graves sank inward. Headstones melted like wax. The names engraved upon them blurred, faded, then reformed. Not as names, but as sentences. Full phrases scrawled in jagged ancient script no one had seen before, and yet somehow everyone understood. This ground remembers before God did. The skin is a veil, the bones are the scripture. When the last twin breathes in reverse, the mouth below will open. At first, townsfolk tried to stop the transformation. They hammered fresh stones into the earth, tried to restore the names, bless the soil. But each night the changes returned, and with each new phrase, more reality seemed to bend around the words. Children began speaking in sleep, quoting the tombstones word for word. Midwives stopped delivering healthy babies. The last 3 births that week all came with their faces covered in bone. The doctor, old McCleary, tried to autopsy one. The bones grew back as he cut. He never returned to medicine, only sat in his office and whispered, "They weren't dead, just not finished." One evening, Josephine Calloway, the town's oldest woman at 92, began screaming from her attic. When her family burst in, they found her standing atop a table, clutching a femur in each hand. Not her own, her mother's. She dug up the grave herself, walked miles barefoot, and reassembled the full skeleton in her bedroom. When asked why, she said, "They told me she has something to say." Then she smiled and stepped out the window. She didn't fall. She floated, hovering mid-air like an oil painting unbound from its frame, her mouth wide open, emitting no sound, only vibration. Dust trembled, nails quivered in wood. Far below, the ground responded with a shudder, like an ancient chest taking breath after centuries underground. The cemetery cracked. From Benet, at the oldest grave, one unmarked, bones rose, not in a pile but assembled. A towering figure 12 feet high, too many joints, no eyes, its skull carved in symbols matching the stones. It did not speak. It wrote. Dragging its fingers through dirt, it inscribed a single line, again and again. We were never gone, only misnamed. And with that, Black Hollow understood. They hadn't buried the dead. They had caged the authors of the world. By the time the bones began writing, something else had quietly taken hold. People were forgetting. Not in the usual way, not the slow unraveling of age or illness. No, this was swift, surgical. One moment a man would be laughing with his daughter on the porch. The next he would turn, eyes hollow, and ask, "Whose child is this?" It wasn't just names. Entire identities vanished mid-sentence. A baker forgot what bread was. A pastor stood before his congregation and asked, "What's a god?" A woman stared at her own reflection and sobbed, whispering, "I'm wearing someone else's skin." Worse still, no one remembered they had forgotten. Memories were replaced, rewritten by something. New false pasts settled into their minds like soot over glass. One morning, the schoolhouse children all came in smiling, excited to share drawings of their families. But none of the faces matched the real ones. Every child had drawn the same man and woman, pale, featureless, eyes like knots in wood. Their hands were always clasped, always pointing to the same thing, a door that didn't exist in any house, a door made of black stone. When asked who these people were, the children answered together, "Our first parents," before the lie. That week the town's records burned. No one set the fire. The clerk's office simply ignited, from within. Flames licked the walls but didn't consume them. Only the papers vanished. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, land deeds. Even the sheriff's badge melted into liquid silver and sank into the wood floor. And still, no one panicked, because no one remembered what they'd lost, except one. Amos Greer, once a quiet farmer, became the town's last living mirror. Something in his blood resisted the forgetting, but that came with a price. He saw both realities at once. His wife, dead for 10 years, now sat beside him every morning, brush and ing his hair, humming lullabies. And yet, when he blinked, she was gone. When he blinked again, back. His house changed every hour. Sometimes his field was a lake, sometimes a graveyard. Once he opened his barn and found a cathedral built of ribs. He began carving his memories into wood. Hundreds of small figurines, each a moment, each a name. He lined them on shelves, whispering to them like children. And one night, the shelves whispered back. They told him the truth. You are not the last. You are the first to return. In Black Hollow, memory had become currency, and something was collecting debt. It happened at noon. All at once, across every building in Black Hollow, homes, shops, the courthouse, even the chapel, the paint began to peel, but not from time or weather. It peeled in perfect symmetry, curling back like skin from fruit, revealing not the wooden planks beneath, but something else. Scenes, painted not on the walls, but inside them, etched deep within the grain, hidden like buried parchment. Hundreds of images swirling with a clarity that defied logic, as if the town itself had been hollowed out and filled with a secret gallery of its own sins. Each image told a story Black Hollow had long buried. The town's founder, Elias Granger, strangling a pregnant woman in the woods. A secret tribunal of men in white gloves and no mouths, marking infants with red-hot irons. A map carved into a human back, detailing tunnels beneath the church, tunnels that led to a room shaped like a heart. The townspeople gathered in horror, watching their history bleed out of the walls, but it wasn't just visuals. Sound followed. Each wall echoed with voices, ghosts of arguments, confessions, and screams. Whole conversations played like phonograph reels, denials, chants, prayers in tongues never taught. In one house, a baby's cry looped endlessly. In another, a woman laughed without breath. Sheriff Monroe tried to cover it all up. He ordered men to repaint, to sand the wood, to tear the walls down. But every new coat of paint peeled immediately. The truth didn't want to stay hidden. And then came the worst part. The images began to change. No longer just depictions of the past, they became moving portraits of the present. People saw themselves moments before they'd arrived, standing, watching, reacting, exactly as they were now. Then came the future. One woman saw herself hanging from her porch. An hour later, she was. A boy saw himself clawing through dirt, screaming beneath the schoolhouse. He vanished before sundown. They found his fingernails under the floorboards and his eyes embedded in the chalkboard, staring out like buttons made of sorrow. Finally, the chapel wall changed. It showed all of them. The whole town gathered in a circle, naked, kneeling, holding their own bones in their hands. Above them, a figure of infinite height, faceless and dressed in red, whispered one word: rewrite. And then the paint resealed, perfectly smooth, as if the walls had inhaled. That night, no one slept. Because the next morning they found the chapel just as the painting had shown. Only this time, the figure in red was real. The town awoke to silence so total, it felt like pressure, like cotton in the ears, or being underwater. No birds, no wind. Even the church bell, which had once rung each Sunday at dawn, hung motionless, though no one had ever touched it. The chapel was open, and inside stood the red figure. 10 feet tall, no eyes, no mouth, skin like silk soaked in blood. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, but it radiated. Not heat, not cold, but something ancient, something that filled every man, woman, and child in Black Hollow with the same unshakable ancestral instinct. Kneel. They did. Some fought it, tears streaming down their faces. Others knelt with the serenity of surrender, but none remained standing. Even the newborns were found curled at their cribs' edges in a fetal bow. It was not hypnosis. It was alignment. The figure raised one arm. In its hand was a bone, not ivory, not animal. It was human, carved with symbols that shimmered like molten ink. No one recognized the language, yet everyone understood the message. This is the truth you buried. This is the God you forgot. This is the debt you owe. Then the sermon began, but not in words, in visions. Each person saw their own life, unraveling. A reverse birth. Memories peeled backward. Faces of dead relatives stared, mouths sewn shut. A black cradle rocked in an endless void. And then they saw something they had never seen before, yet recognized instantly: their original self. Not the self shaped by society or time, but the raw, primal version. The one who remembered the hunger, the shadows, the old contract made before flesh. That self stood behind each of them in the vision, whispering one sentence: "It's time to return." When the figure lowered its hand, the bone vanished. So did the red figure. But the people remained kneeling, long after nightfall. Some say it lasted hours, others days. One boy claims, they all died for 7 minutes, and the town clock skipped accordingly. When questioned, the clocksmith found that all the gears had melted inside. From that day on, the town was changed. Doors no longer had locks, windows refused to shatter, and mirrors, if you dared to look, showed not your face, but the red figure, slowly approaching from behind. Closer each day. There was no preacher anymore, no sermons, because the God they served now needed no church. It began in whispers, a soft hum under the breath of the youngest, those barely able to form full sentences. Parents thought it was nothing, a child's imagination, some lullaby misremembered. But then every child in Black Hollow began singing the same rhyme, at the same time. Ashes to ashes, the tower will fall. Mothers forget, and fathers crawl. Teeth in the garden, eyes in the wall. He is coming, he sees us all. The tune was haunting, not just for its words but for its structure. Musicologists later called it mathematically perfect, a melody only achievable through computational design, not human error, as if engineered, not learned. They sang it in classrooms, during meals, in their sleep. Teachers attempted to stop it. One slapped a child across the mouth. Blood poured out, but the song continued, unbroken, as if coming from his lungs. The next day, that teacher vanished. No one searched for her. That evening, the song mutated. Children added verses no adult could understand. But it wasn't gibberish. It was an ancient language, one that hadn't existed in human records. Linguists brought in from Boston wept upon hearing it. One left town and was later found naked, painting spiral sigils on a cliffside with his own blood. The town council called an emergency meeting. They tried to enforce silence among the children. Isolation, sedation, even exorcism. It failed. One child, 6-year-old Abigail Wren, began carving the lyrics into her wall using her fingernails. Her parents heard scratching and found every verse inscribed backward, perfectly mirrored, not one word out of place. She stared at them, eyes rolled white, and whispered, "We were born to remember what you forgot." The nursery rhyme became law. Adults started humming it without realizing. It spread like a virus, not airborne, not digital. It wanted to be known, and the moment you heard it, you couldn't forget it. Even in dreams it echoed, reshaping the fabric of sleep. Then came the dolls. Handmade ones. No one admitted to crafting them, but each home woke to find one resting in their child's bed. Sewn mouths, hollow eyes, stuffed with black feathers. Inside each was a small slip of parchment with a new verse: "Play with me till the night turns red, then bury your soul where the others bled." Black Hollow didn't teach its children anymore, they taught it, and the town listened. It came without warning. On a cloudless September night, the entire town of Black Hollow fell silent, not metaphorically, but physically. No wind, no insects, no breath. Even the mechanical world obeyed. Clocks ticked without sound. Church bells swung without chime. Dogs opened their mouths, but no bark followed. Sound itself had been suspended. Sheriff Ewell, already worn thin from months of unexplained horrors, tried to radio his deputy. Nothing. He shouted into the radio so hard he burst a vessel in his throat, but not a single decibel crossed the line. And then the lights began to blink in rhythm. Not random, a pattern. From house to house, lamplight pulsed 3 times long, 2 short, 3 long again. Morse code. But when decoded, it didn't spell words, it revealed coordinates. coordinates that pointed to a clearing behind the Granger estate. At exactly midnight, every mirror in town, regardless of size or location, fogged over from the inside, and on each one, a single red fingerprint appeared. Experts later confirmed it wasn't human blood. It was something older. Its protein structure matched nothing in modern biology. A handful of brave townspeople followed the coordinates to the clearing. What they found defied explanation. A spiral, 30 feet wide, carved into the earth as if burned from below. In its center stood 4 figures, identical in height and form. Children, naked, eyes covered in a black resin, hands interlocked. The Granger quadruplets. Except these were not the same children who had vanished into the estate years prior. These were taller. Their limbs were slightly elongated. Their skin had a translucent film beneath it, like an insect's molting stage. And when Reverend Pike tried to speak a prayer, they all turned to him in unison and opened their mouths. No sound emerged, but everyone present heard them. Inside their minds, a voice. Not 4, not 1, but many, braided together like 1,000 minds speaking through a single consciousness. You are late. He is awake. The earth shook, not from tectonic movement, but from frequency, a resonance that shattered window panes as far away as Baltimore. A farmer's cow exploded from the inside out, glass cracked in people's teeth. And somewhere beneath the soil, a pulse began, slow, steady, and growing louder in their bones. The night without sound ended with a scream, not from a throat, but from reality itself. What lay beneath Black Hollow had heard its name spoken, and now it wanted to see. By morning, most of Black Hollow looked the same. Same homes, same roads, same sky, but something was missing. The sun. It rose according to clocks. Birds moved in patterns suggesting daylight, but no warmth, no brightness, only a dim, bloodless haze that filtered across the landscape like gauze soaked in ash. People emerged from their homes quietly, not in panic, not in fear, in obedience. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. They simply walked toward the Granger estate in single file, as if summoned. Some barefoot, some still in nightgowns. Even the infants were carried without protest. Reverend Pike, whose mind had splintered in the clearing the night before, stood at the edge of town whispering numbers over and over. 444. 444. They're all here. They've always been here. In the Granger field, the spiral was gone. But something new had taken its place. A circle burned into the earth, but only visible from above. 22 feet across, laced with glyphs too ancient for scripture, too precise for guesswork. Each glyph corresponded to one child born in Black Hollow since the Granger's arrival, and in the center, a void. Not darkness, not shadow, a total absence, a space where light, thought, and time refused to exist. It wasn't a hole in the ground, it was a hole in reality. One by one, the townspeople gathered around the circle, eyes wide, hands clasped. No expression, no breath, like statues made of meat and memory. Then the Granger boys appeared. All 4. No longer children, no longer flesh. Their limbs shimmered with geometry, shapes that shouldn't exist in our dimension. Their eyes pulsed in 4 different hues: obsidian, crimson, emerald, and gold. They didn't speak, but each person in the crowd fell to their knees, as if commanded by something inside their bloodline. The boys began to circle the void, ilking in opposite directions, forming an infinite figure 8. And with every pass, something from the crowd vanished. Not a body, a memory. First names, then faces, then relationships. Husbands forgot wives, mothers forgot children. People looked at each other and saw strangers. This wasn't erasure, it was harvesting, not of life, but of identity, of history, of continuity itself. By nightfall, only 44 people remembered what Black Hollow had once been, and by dawn, only 4. When the town of Black Hollow woke the next morning, It was as if it had always been empty. No laughter, no trade, no church bells, just a dull, oppressive silence that pressed against the skull like a migraine without a name. But somewhere beneath the surface of that silence, 4 minds still held the truth. They didn't choose to remember. They were chosen to endure. Jeremiah Quinn, the retired railroad worker whose dreams had been riddled with screams ever since the mirror rituals began. Martha LeClaire, a midwife whose hands had delivered every Granger brother, though she had no memory of ever entering the estate. Thaddeus Griggs, the town's clockmaker, whose shop no longer contained a single timepiece that moved. And Ada Wren, just 13 years old, born deaf, blind in one eye, but cursed with perfect recall. She remembered everything. They were scattered across the hollow, isolated, but their minds burned with the same shared memory. The ritual, the spiral, the circle, the void, and the twins, no, the quadruplets, walking through time like it was clay in their hands. For a moment, these 4 wandered through the hollow, confused but compelled. They met at the crossroads without planning it. Each had something etched into their skin overnight, a mark, circular, pulsating faintly beneath the flesh like a buried eye. When Jeremiah tried to cut his out with a penknife, it blinked, and the blade rusted in seconds. Ada spoke first, her voice low, strained, like it didn't belong to her. They left something behind. Martha nodded slowly, tears forming without reason. Something inside us. They realized, with a dread too large to hold in words, that they weren't survivors. They were containers. Not for knowledge, but for the unfinished pattern, for the memory that the brothers hadn't erased, because it was still feeding. Thaddeus, trembling, reached into his pocket and pulled out an old key, rusted, heavy, unlabeled. "I don't know where it goes," he whispered, "but my hand won't let go of it." The sky flickered, not with lightning, with code, brief, angular flashes above the clouds, like something watching from beneath the skin of the world. Ada tilted her head. "They're not done." And then the ground beneath their feet shuddered. There are stories that die with time, and then there are those that kill time itself, coiling through generations, altering memory, rewriting identity, reshaping the very substance of truth. The tale of the Granger brothers was never a tale. It was a transmission. When Ada, Jeremiah, Martha, and Thaddeus stepped toward the center of the crossroads, they weren't walking through Black Hollow anymore. The land peeled away, like fabric, like stage curtains falling back to reveal the operating theater behind all perception. Above them, no sky, just a dome of reflective glass. Beneath them, no earth, just circuitry, wide and vascular, like the exposed spine of a living machine. And standing at the center was the mirror. Not a copy, the original, but now it pulsed, breathed, its surface no longer glass. It was skin stretched over memory. Faces moved behind it, not trapped, preserved, waiting, watching. The 4 remembered too much, so the mirror opened. Each was shown their own face, but not as they were, as they could have become if the ritual had completed. And what stared back wasn't human. It was the next iteration, the one hidden beneath the current of flesh, the one that used names like Ada as training wheels for higher thought. They had a choice: forget and survive, or remember and be absorbed. All but Ada screamed. Ada stepped forward, and the mirror touched her back. What followed cannot be described, only suggested. Reality folded. The crossroads split into 4 roads, then 8, then 16. With each fold, a new Ada walked out, all blind in one eye, all marked, all silent. They spread across the country over the next 100 years, no birth certificates, no death records, just witness accounts of strange girls who appeared in orphanages, hospitals, and homes, each whispering the same phrase before vanishing: "The brothers are no longer." 4. Now they are everywhere. Black Hollow was erased from maps in 1903. Satellite imagery of the region today shows a persistent signal disruption, a static ring of interference that not even military-grade sensors can penetrate. Locals say if you drive past mile marker 187 at dusk, your reflection lags behind you in the rearview mirror, and sometimes it waves. But you're alone. A final memo from the declassified DARPA file says, "The quadruplets are not anomalies. They are instructions. Whoever completes the pattern becomes the pattern." So if you're reading this, it has already begun. Because the archive is not out there, it's under your skin.